for instance, a tribe in the Amazon. Produces the knowledge that this plant can produce a medicine that has this healing power, or they can have this effect of a pesticide, for instance. Now, what's called biopiracy is when a corporation, Monsanto, a pharmaceutical company, patents this information, makes it private property, and sells it. That's called biopiracy. And so you can see that in that example, it's in a way the conjunction between two forms of the common, in a way together. It's both the earth as common, the trees as common, but also the knowledge produced by the indigenous community that has functioned as common, and that together they're being made private property. Biopiracy, in fact, biopiracy, I object to that term, biopiracy, because it slanders pirates. Because pirates actually steal property. Whereas this biopiracy is stealing the common and making it into property. It seems to be something much worse. In any case, it gives you the idea of the way that they can intersect. I was thinking of another example. Well, I've just mentioned, for instance, the struggles over water rights in Bolivia seems to me another example in the early parts of this decade. And in fact, struggles that led to Evo Morales' election. That struggle over water rights against neoliberalism seemed to be another example of the kind of intersection between these two forms of the common I was talking about. One last thing. We're still okay. Okay. I just had one last, because that, I think, at least that's a general framework of the idea of this book, Commonwealth, is trying to understand the way that the common is becoming central today, and the way it is conflicting with the current relations of property, and perhaps opening the possibility for something else. In fact, I guess I would put it that what we think is the primary, our primary objective is to try to invent forms of the management of the common, to understand alternative institutions of the management of the common that can function differently. Just want to give one last example of the post. This is in a way after finishing this book, I was very inspired and interested by the encounters of the social movements in Copenhagen in December. So I went to Copenhagen in December, and I didn't, of course, participate in any of the official UN meetings. But I was rather outside with the movements, and it seemed to me a very interesting encounter between two streams of social movements that have remained relatively separate in recent years. There was the altered globalization movements, often anti-capitalist movements that you could say come in the stream from either Seattle 10 years ago or from the Zapatista movement in Chiapas that somehow follow part of this line. And then there's the ecological movements, or the movements focused on climate change. And in a way that the two streams of movements are different precisely because they're focused on different forms or domains of the common. In other words, obviously the climate change activists are focused primarily on the earth and its ecosystems, whereas the altered globalization activists have been primarily focused on what I'm calling this second form of the common which is this realm of ideas and images and affects and code and information. And the contrast between the two movements, or at least the conceptual disjunction that I recognize, seemed very interesting to me, even in their slogans. Because, for instance, one of my favorite slogans of the last 10 years in the altered globalization movements has been, "We want everything for everyone." The Zapatistas say, "Todo para todos." We want everything for everyone, which is, I think, quite a charming slogan. But from the point of view of the climate change people, that just sounds like mutually assured destruction. We can't have everything for everyone. We already have too much for everyone, something like that. But you can see that they're focused on different, whereas the common, whereas the second notion of the common is fundamentally unlimited. That ideas, not only can we share them, but they are somewhat infinitely reproducible, and And creating more doesn't, I mean, it does no harm to create more ideas. I mean, it might be annoying to have more ideas, but in general, it doesn't hurt anyone to make more ideas, more affects, more. Whereas the Earth is fundamentally limited. And so that I could think the corresponding slogan might be my favorite placard at the legal march in Copenhagen in December was "There is no planet B." But I think it's a clever slogan, and it's good and everything, but from the perspective, meaning, that we have no choice but to work with this Earth, something. And also the fact that those inside the meetings have no plan B was also the notion. But, from the perspective of the altered globalization activists, that sounds a lot like Margaret Thatcher saying there is no alternative. Because there's always been, what we've always been working with is alternatives. Even the World Social Forum slogan, another world is possible. And that too, the climate change people would say something like, this world is still possible, maybe. So it's I think this conflict, this antinomy between limits and limitlessness is an interesting, it's an interesting confrontation. I don't mean this as a, I mean it's against my nature to pose this as something that obstructs us. In fact, I think rather what was already happening in Copenhagen and will happen over the next period is a working through this antinomy on the part of the movements themselves, and kind of thinking through it. It's not the first time we faced. 10 years ago in Seattle, one of the first media reactions to the Seattle protest, then all the other summits, was that having to do with globalization and anti-globalization. So the protesters were immediately called anti-globalization. Protesters thought, we're not against globalization, we're not against limits. And there was a kind of, I think, working through this antinomy between globalization, which seemed to only mean Starbucks and international corporations, and anti-globalization, which was somehow a limitation in the local. It took quite a while, I think, for them, a kind of conceptual work within the movements to develop terms like alter globalization that were neither the one nor the other, that in a way solved this antinomy. And I think a similar kind of work is on the agenda now for working through the different notions of the common and the qualities that they propose. Okay, so this is what I just mean to present this as, and this is where I'll stop, is as an example of the kinds of conceptual and political difficulties that have to be worked out if we are to build a new commonwealth. That is, to invent the institutions of a self-management of the common. This is the kind of work it seems to be that we have to do.
Ja, vielen Dank. Zu Beginn erstmal eine ganz scheinbar banale Frage, die ich aber jetzt, wo ich sie da habe, einfach mal stellen darf, weil ich sonst nie Gelegenheit dazu habe. Und außerdem, wenn man ein Buch schreibt über den gemeinsamen Besitz von auch immateriellen Gütern und Ideen, muss ich doch mal fragen, wie schreiben Sie eigentlich zu zweit? Wenn es doch dabei auch um gemeinsame Ideen geht. Ich meine es tatsächlich wirklich sehr konkret. Können Sie einmal sagen, wie Sie zu zweit schreiben? Nicht im Sinne von, ob Sie sich um die gemeinsamen Ideen streiten, sondern tatsächlich wie der Prozess eines solchen Buches und gemeinsamen Schreibens, das Entwickeln von Ideen zusammen ist.
Well, there's a first moment. Okay. There's a conceptual level in which we do, in a way, think about it. I don't know if common is the right term for this, but when we write differently when we're writing together, in the sense that I write in what I imagine is Tony's voice, and Tony writes in what he imagines is my voice, and it turns out it's something in between, which is neither the one nor the other. I read, when I had a linguistics course once, I read about...
Es funktioniert nur, wenn Sie scheitern. It only works if you fail.
It only works if you fail, exactly. And we do fail. I mean, because I was thinking of a linguist